I'm Laura Lee Martin, and I'm on the board of the Democratic Women's Club of Santa Cruz County. And today's topic is one that we've been thinking about for some time. But before we start that, I want to make an announcement. The DWC board has voted to endorse Senate Bill 380, and that's the end of life options renewal. We also endorsed the original bill in 2016. The original bill is set to sunset this year, and SB 380 renews it. So we want to thank Senator Monning and Lois Wolk for sponsoring the original legislation, and for Assembly Member Mark Stone for signing on as co-sponsors for the renewal. So that's something we're quite excited about. Now, for our program, Be Safe or Be Bold, a discussion on the direction of the Democratic Party. And we clearly don't have enough time in this hour and a half or so to make this, to completely discuss this, but we're going to give a shot. Divisions over strategy within the Democratic Party are nothing new, and we're a big tent party and we have our differences. However, the question of how to focus the party's work take on new significance now that the Democrats control, even with a slim majority, both houses of Congress and the presidency. There are serious concerns about our losing the Senate and even the House of Representatives in the upcoming term elections in 2022, and we should take that very seriously. So today's discussion, we have three speakers. We're gonna about 8 to 10 minutes each, and then we're gonna do breakout sessions that are about 10 minutes. Mike is somehow magically making us all go into little groups, and then we'll reconvene and have a discussion. If you have questions for the speakers, we ask you to hold on to those till we have a discussion and reconvene. And then I've asked Mike Rotkin if he would help summarize all our great ideas at the end. So I'd like to start with our first speaker, and that's Spencer Critchley. He's a national media commentator, the host of Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good podcast, the managing partner of communications and consultancy with Boots Road Group, and the author of Patriots of Two Nations, Why Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. Thank you, Spencer, for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much, Laura Lee, and thanks everybody for inviting me. I'm going to be talking about some ideas that are developed in my book, Patriots of Two Nations, and if you're looking for a shorter version of them, you can find them, excuse me, in an article I wrote for the Institute of Arts and Ideas, which is based in England, and you can find a link to that at spencercritchley.com/print-web. So spencercritchley.com/print-web. So I'm going to try to give you the 8 to 10 minute version of those ideas right now. So the question today is, should we be bold or be safe? And I would say we could be bold or be safe from a policy point of view. And when it comes to winning elections, it won't actually make much difference to the challenge that we really face. Democrats lose way too many elections. We should be winning a whole lot more of them because we have a natural majority. When you think about it, we represent way more people than they do. The other side represents a minority of Americans, and that's the structural problem they face. And yet we're in a rough draw with them, and they often beat us when they shouldn't. It's great that we won this last election, but it shouldn't have been as close as it was. And we shouldn't be looking at this razor-thin majority in the House in particular. Why do we lose? Why do we lose so much? There are structural reasons like gerrymandering and the Electoral College. But also I'm going to argue that we lose because Democrats tend to be bad at communication. And this is true of both moderates and progressives. The problem is that liberals think it's enough to be right, but it's nowhere near enough just to be right. You have to persuade people to vote for you, including people who don't agree with you about some things. And it turns out that doesn't have very much to do with being right. Now, surveys show that most Americans like liberal policies, but they don't like liberals. If you look at ideological identification, do people identify as liberal or not? About 25% of Americans identify as liberal. 35% identify as moderate, and 37% identify as conservative. This goes up and down, but it stays about in that range. Now, why is that? Most Americans like our policies, but they don't identify with us. Because I'll say, Democrats don't communicate well, and the other side is actually quite a lot better at it. The problem here is that our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. Unlike the other side, we're committed to Enlightenment reason, which is our greatest strength. That means we're usually right about policy because we care about things like data and logic. But it's also our greatest weakness because since the Enlightenment, we've been stuck in our heads increasingly and cut off from our hearts and guts. And that means we get persuasion wrong because persuasion happens in the heart and the gut, not in the head. Democrats tend not to persuade, but instead to share information. So that means that Democrats are good at policy, but bad at politics. We're good at economics and bad at culture. We're good at talking, but bad at connecting. Communication doesn't happen when you talk. It happens when you're heard. And information is not influence. Connection is influence. And connection is based on trust, emotion, and shared symbols. All these things that are not rational. So here's an example that I often use when I'm teaching people about effective communication or consulting with clients. And that's the Don't Mess with Texas anti-litter campaign, which is one of the most successful social marketing campaigns. By social marketing, I mean influencing social behavior campaigns in history. Now in Texas, like a lot of places, they had tried for many years to try to get people to stop littering so much, and they kept failing. And in fact, often their campaigns would lead to more litter. And then they discovered what they were doing wrong was they weren't actually thinking about the people they were trying to connect with. And one of the problems was the use of the word litter. Texans don't say litter. And as soon as you say a word like litter, which sounds kind of fancy and kind of Eastern, frankly, you lose them. So Texans actually say mess. And once they had that insight, that's where they came up with Don't Mess with Texas. And everything shifted. And they realized, stop making the argument about the environment or the way things look, and instead have like the Dallas Cowboys or Willie Nelson or other Texas icons talking about Don't Mess with Texas. It was all about cultural values and feelings, not about facts and logic. And it meant getting to know the actual people you're trying to persuade. And too often Democrats don't do that. They don't get to know the people they're trying to persuade. Instead, they just make assumptions about them and then skip to giving them the right answer.
5 minutes in.
Thank you. So that, oh great, I think I'm about halfway through. So check out this irony. The other side is trying to screw the people that we're trying to help, but they lavish way more attention on understanding them. And that feels like they care a lot more in many cases. Consider this, more than 90% of Black Americans are Democrats, but many Democrats will be surprised to learn that only about 25% of African Americans are liberals, about the same as the general population. Or consider the assumption that the #1 issue for Latinos is immigration. But Latinos are fully formed people and they care a lot of things like everyone else does. Republicans know not to say litter to Texans, and they know there are Black people and Latinos, for example, who will agree with some of their messaging. They think like marketers, and we think like political scientists. There's been a recent article I recommend with David Shore, who's a very smart data scientist, analyzing the data from the 2020 election. I recommend anything that you can find by David Shore, S-H-O-R. In 2020, we gained 7% among college-educated whites, but we lost 1 to 2% among African Americans, 8 to 9% among Latinos, and it looks like maybe about 5% among Asian Americans. The parties are mirror images of each other. The other side is bad at policy and good at politics, and we're good at policy and bad at politics. Campaigns are not about policy details. Voters are choosing a leader, not a manager. Campaigns are not logical, they're mythological. Compared to getting the feel right in a campaign, the facts are almost irrelevant. Facts are just vehicles for feelings in a campaign. Too many Democrats aren't even aware that getting the feel right is crucial. And if they're told it is, they'll often say things like, voters shouldn't be so stupid. So they'd rather wait around for smarter voters than to figure out how to persuade the voters we have. And it doesn't mean they're stupid, it means you're not connecting with them. And then we'll often point to polls on issues, but miss the culture gap that is causing the communication problem. So the way the bold versus safe argument is being held in our party is an example of how we get things wrong, because the argument is over policy, and in a campaign, policy almost doesn't matter. It's what the policy feels like and how you talk about it. So in this last primary, as usual, all the activists were arguing over policy, and voters hardly cared. They were focused on who felt like someone who would fight for them, fight and win. It's the same with the opposition. The reason the Trump campaign was so afraid of Joe Biden wasn't because of policy. It was because they knew Biden could match Trump on all the non-rational stuff, the way things felt. And if you compare Trump and Hillary in 2016, he was the least qualified candidate in history, and she was one of the most qualified. But he campaigned on feel and felt authentic, even though he was lying all the time. And she campaigned on bullet points, and many people felt that she was inauthentic, whether that was true or not. It wasn't that she was too far right or left on policy. It didn't really matter. It was how it felt. And again, too many Democrats think having the right answer is enough. She had all the right answers from a lot of people's point of view, or close enough, but it didn't end up making the difference. A campaign is not a science test. So here's another example, and that's the slogan, defund the police, that there was a lot of controversy over in 2020 and still is. Now this slogan, in my opinion, points to good policy ideas. More prevention means less enforcement, and crime comes out of social problems that we should address. So good policy ideas, but it's a terrible political campaign slogan because it scares away persuadable voters. After defund the police got a lot of attention, it looks like Latino support for Joe Biden fell. This was during the general election campaign. He wasn't arguing for that slogan, he was disavowing it, but the other side was able to associate it with him.
About a minute left.
Okay, thank you. The problem here is that Democrats tend to look at people as theoretical constructs, like, for example, the working class, but people don't think of themselves that way. The question that we often hear is, what's the matter with Kansas when working and middle class people vote for the other side? That's not the right question. The question is, what's the matter with Democratic campaigns? And it's what's wrong with both the safe ones and the bold ones. In a democracy, if we want to make progress, we have to win elections. And we owe it to the people we serve to get better at that. So that's what I wanted to introduce as my thoughts on this. And again, you can find more about this in my book, Patriots of Two Nations, or if you go to spencercritchley.com/print-web, there's a link to an article that gives you the shorter version.
You could put that in the chat as well so people can find it if you like.
Yes, thank you so much, Spencer. And I was going to say the same thing. Please post anything like that, any connecting information links in the chat. And also, sure, if you're watching, questions and comments can also be posted in chat. Okay, thank you, Spencer. Our next speaker is Cindy Dawson. Cindy's lived in Santa Cruz since the late 90s. She's currently on the Santa Cruz Planning Commission and was the top vote getter in District 3 elections last year for the Santa Cruz County Democratic Central Committee. She's a member of the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, and her day job is being a marine scientist who focuses on connecting science to decision makers. Thank you, Cindy, for joining us.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. And I guess I would just like to start off by saying that I'm going to respectfully disagree with the previous speaker and say that the Democrats don't have a communication problem. They actually have a problem in delivering policy and results for the majority of Americans. And I'll get into that in a second, but I don't want to go down the road of political dogma or political theory, mostly because I want to try to keep everybody awake this morning. But I do think it's probably worth spending a second actually defining what socialism is and what socialism isn't. So let's just start off with socialism is not a political party. Socialism is essentially an economic system. And democratic socialists, which I am one of, believe that both society and the economy should be run democratically to meet public needs. So in a nutshell, if someone says socialism, what they mean is it's a system that values people over profits, full stop. There's a lot of debate about how to do things related to that, but I think it's important just to have that core thing in people's head when we talk about socialism. So democratic socialists don't believe in an all-powerful government bureaucracy, and we certainly don't believe in all-powerful corporations making decisions for society. So one of the most effective political manipulations of all time, since we're talking about communications, is when Republicans and corporate Democrats made socialism a boogeyman. It served them very well. Making socialism a scary monster is a great way, and probably the only way, to make sure that socialism doesn't win, because socialism benefits the majority of people. And what it does ensure is it ensures party infighting, which is happening right now. It ensures the left and the right of the party are talking to each other instead of getting things done for the majority of people. And it's really affected the Democrats' ability to deliver for the majority of people for the last 40 years, if you really start digging into it. So again, if you believe in public schools, you believe in public utilities, you believe in public roads, you want the same thing socialists want. If you believe workers should reap the biggest benefits from their work and be able to make decisions about the company that they work at, again, socialism. If you believe housing and healthcare are an inherent human right, and everybody should have that regardless of their life decisions, that's socialism. So what does all that socialism talk have to do with where the Democratic Party should be going? I hope we can all agree that the last election cycle for Democrats was an unmitigated disaster. Going up against what will probably be historically qualified as the worst U.S. presidential administration of all time, we lost seats in the House. We failed to gain a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and we lost down ballot races across the country. So, you know, in California, voters rejected affirmative action. Here in California, we rejected expansion of rent control. We stripped away a law that actually gave worker protections to gig economy workers, which is a huge part of our economy here in California right now. And we rejected taxing commercial property to make very much needed improvements in social services and education. So that was all rejected. So instead of, within the Democratic Party, both nationally and in the state, instead of us owning up to the fact that we had a pretty huge failure, and the failure we had is turning out voters that would benefit from these types of policies. We basically have started this right and left finger pointing that, it was because we were being too conservative or we were being too liberal is the reason that we are not connecting with the majority of the people.
That's 5 minutes.
Okay, and you can hear this debate continuing in, some of the stuff that the previous speaker just said, and also just like in a recent op-ed in the Sentinel, we're doing it, right? We're doing this right-left, like it's the right fault, it's the left fault. So Democratic Party affiliation has flatlined, and for decades. So what we're doing is not working. And I think, it's because we're not delivering policies that affect people's lives, the majority of people's lives, right? So no party preference is the second biggest party in California right now, and it's growing. And Democratic Socialists, we had 6,000 members in 2012. We just, in 2021 in January, we're now at 90,000 members nationally. So what the Democrats are doing is not connecting, not delivering, and I don't think it's a communication problem. It's just the fact that we're not delivering for the majority of the people. So what Democrats have actually been doing is making policy for the 2% of Americans who hold 50% of the wealth. And we've been calling that a centrist and moderate position. But making policy that benefits the 2% is not a centrist position. It's actually very radical, right? Deregulation under Clinton, corporate bailouts, Wall Street bailouts under Obama, those were radical policies because they actually were only benefiting an incredibly small amount of Americans. So when we talk about policy benefits that are for the majority of constituents, that's not a radically left policy. That's a centrist policy. So a $15 minimum wage, affordable public college, paid family leave, labor laws that elevate unions, substantially higher taxes on corporations and individuals. Those are not radical policies. Those are centrist policies because they actually benefit the majority of Americans. So the 80% of families who've been left behind by 40 years of trickle-down economics, which Democrats have played a big role in, you know, they don't think that these policies I just mentioned are centrist policies. They're what the majority needs. So Democrats are not going to get people to come off the sidelines by being less bad than the other side. I will agree that that is a communication problem, because saying that we're less bad than the alternative is not going to motivate someone to come off the sidelines. And because of gerrymandering, the only way Democrats win is by growing the party. It's simple math. And the growth potential for the Democratic Party is workers. We used to be a party of labor, and we've turned our back on that. And there's numerous party examples over the last 40 years. So the growth potential is in working class, working poor, and young people. And we need to turn our attention to delivering results for those people, making policy that benefits those people's lives. So it's not a communication problem that we, 6 months, a year before an election, we start talking about all these why you should vote Democrat. People know why, because their lives have been made better by what Democrats have done. That's how Democrats win. That's how Democrats get people to come off the sidelines who've been disenfranchised, disengaged in politics, and join the party and move forward these policies that the propaganda wants to paint as left, but actually are centrist policies that benefit the majority of Americans. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Cindy. Our third speaker this morning is Joy Flynn. She's a community activist. She's in the respiratory business. She's a specialist, and she's facilitating courageous conversations with the city of Capitola and its residents in the First Community Anti-Racist Series Forum. She's also the founding member of the Santa Cruz County Black Coalition for Justice and Racial Equity. Thank you for joining us, Joy.
Thank you for having me. And I am a founding member. There is a group of us that came together to form the coalition. And I am in pharmaceutical sales. That's the respiratory part.
Thank you.
So I have this really unique perspective and position working for corporate America, and then also, you know, kind of just being a Black woman in Santa Cruz during this time. I did not want to go first because I really wanted to listen to the first two speakers, as I wouldn't consider myself apolitical, because clearly I have a stand and I have a viewpoint, and I feel like that's what I can offer as the minority speaker. I hear you both, Cindy and Spencer, if I may call you by your first names, saying the same thing in a lot of ways. And I really, really resonated with Spencer, with what you were saying about the connection. And that's why I've been able to connect with so many people and get so much done, is because I'm meeting people where they are and listening to them. But also, Cindy, the socialist aspect, I've been thinking about that concept quite a bit for myself, because I'm actually a registered independent, because I was raised Republican and did not like what I was seeing. But still, when I turned 18, if I had registered as I felt suppressed. I felt like I could not register as a Democrat. So I figured the medium would be an independent, because I felt like there needed to be bipartisanship and conversations between both. And I felt like that was where I could fit. But I think, you know, Cindy, you talk about the communication and policy. It's both and. It really, really is. It's about connecting with the people, educating the people. And when I say the people, it's the majority of people, but it's the minority. It's the oppressed, really. Communicating with the group that these policies are in favor of them. And communicating that from a space of recognizing their experience as oppressed people, and recognizing that that they need a voice and that they have a voice, and that the Democratic Party recognizes it, sees it, wants to do something about it, so that people feel supported. I think that's the way that that people are going to feel really advocated for. I think that really is what it comes down to, is that advocacy piece. You know, the thing that I do, I've been on panels before. I don't often prepare words unless it's a speech. I do a lot of kind of back and forth communication and feel much more comfortable in those situations. But it's this balance, I think. Really what needs to happen is that we need to find, nominate, endorse, support campaigns financially, and elect Black people into office. I think but that's hard to do here, right? Because there's not that many Black people. I'm looking for my notes, but I can't, I was not planning on taking up all of the time. But, you know, it's a balance. Well, you have to really just choose politics or people, you know, and economics or ethics. And I think that once that is what the individual chooses, and I think the Democratic Party can choose people and ethics. And because there's been such a turn off to politics, we have a lot of apolitical people who just don't even want to get involved. When, again, people are felt like they're heard and seen, and their struggles are valid, and that there is going to be policy fought for and made and changed for their benefit. I think that, and how to communicate that on an individual level, it's kind of grassroots, I think, is the way to go.
That's 5 minutes.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was just about to stop, because I want to open it up for, I know people have things to say, and I'm really, you know, getting fully back into politics in the year. I was explaining before we got on everybody got on the call, that I was kind of one of those people that was teetering being apolitical and not really having a stand and not wanting to listen and not wanting to be involved, because it just got to be too much. But now, with all of the social injustice that's going on, I couldn't stand back and not be a part of trying to create equitable policy for the oppressed people. But that being said, and I will close out again with what Spencer was saying and Cindy was saying, I think it's both and. I think it's communicating. I do think it's communicating the the need of the people and advocating for the people. And some of that will include what is traditionally called socialist. And it is hard. I mean, socialism has a lot of really good ideas. It's very supportive of the working individual and does not allow for this 2% to continue to gain. And that is a huge part of the problem. And that the wealth needs to be disseminated a lot more equally. But when we communicate that, it needs to be communicated with a sense of care and heart. So that's.
Thank you, Joy. All right, we're going to do a little bit of magic now somehow, at least Mike is, and he's going to break us into smaller groups. And Mike, we're going to have about 10, maybe a little bit longer.
Just 10.
10 minutes? 10 minutes. And then we'll all come back together. So in these 10 minutes, please make sure everybody in your group has a chance to talk and really sort of just share ideas and see how you feel about the speakers so far and where you think the party ought to be going. Okay, so I'm really impressed how you did the breakout rooms, Mike. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the easier things on Zoom.
I know.
Yeah.
We've learned
Thumbs
so
up
much
if you thought
anyway.
that was sort of cool. I thought it was cool.
That's all right. Stay with cool. Yeah.
All right. So we still have about 5
Yeah,
more
good
people, I
job.
think,
Thanks,
to
Mike.
come back. Is there still a breakout in place or are they all back?
I think they've all been closed by now. So we may have lost people, but that's, yeah, that's it. We can start.
Okay, so did we want to have just one sort of a summary from somebody in each breakout? Anything in particular?
No,
or
I
just
think
start a discussion?
that will end up taking all of our
Yeah.
time. I think
Okay.
that was, let me just say the breakout rooms were meant to have people just kind of warmed up for a general conversation.
Okay, so if you want to raise your hand literally, if your screen is dark, if you want to put something in the chat, we can start a discussion. We're going to have about half hour, 45 minutes to have conversation. You can ask the speakers questions or tell us what you think.
It's easier for me to see if you put your hand up, so let me know and I can make sure everybody gets acknowledged.
Okay, Diana.
Unmute.
Thank you. So I'll share what I share with my group is, you know, my parents are Republican. They are hardcore Latino Republicans. They exist. When I turned 18, I felt like I had to register as a Republican. You know, like Joy mentioned, like I felt the pressure for some reason, even though they weren't telling me who to pick or where I should land. You know, I felt the pressure of registering as a Republican. So I did. And then I was a decline to state after that because I didn't feel like I belonged in either camp. And it wasn't until like 2016, 2015-ish where I finally made a decision. I was like, I am going to register as a Democrat and I am going to join these groups so that I can actually learn more about the issues in my community. So I joined the DWC, I joined the DCC. And my parents were actually really angry about it. But they were like, fine, you want to go that way, go for it. I think what you said, Spencer, about messaging is really important for them because my dad immigrated to the U.S. illegally, became a citizen, did all the work he had to do. But he was on the belief that after me, close the gate. I don't care about immigration policy. He could care less about immigration policy. So when people keep talking about like, oh, Latinos care about immigration, no, they don't. My mom could care less about immigration policy too. My mom has very conservative values. And so, you know, have a kid, but be married. You know, for me, if I had a kid now, she would be really angry because I'm not married. Not that I want a kid, but that's something that's really important to her. And for me, you know, I definitely agree with Cindy. Yes, Medicare for all. Yes, you know, housing for all. Yes, we need all of these things. And I believe in the data and the science and, you know, and the numbers behind every single thing. So I think we're definitely talking about two different groups and we need to find that medium where they can all like communicate with each other as a Democratic Party.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to remind everybody that we will, I think Mike is timing us, so we will, if you go on too long, we'll sort of give you a kind of a signal, or at least close your microphone. So everybody has a chance to speak. That was great, thank you.
Cindy's got her hand raised.
Hi, Cindy. You're on mute still. Here.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Diana said. And again, I think the discussion about communication and connecting with communities absolutely is important. But I also think that we need to focus on that elections, because we're kind of talking about the policy platform of the Democratic Party, which is the foundation for elections, come down to math, right? And so Diana's parents are never going to vote Democrat, right? I think it's very unlikely that we're going to persuade them to vote Democratic, right? So the question is, how do we talk to the people that Joy brought up, right? The apolitical people, because you can look at a million different studies and people are not impressed with politicians or interested in politics at all. Like the majority of Americans don't want anything to do with it, right? And so, and a lot of those folks are in communities of color. And so how do we get those people to come off the sidelines? And so to me, how you get those people to come off the sidelines is you deliver to them things they've been asking for. Because even if communities are apolitical, they're asking for things. They're wanting for improvements in their communities. They're wanting for certain things. And so if you deliver that to those folks, that's how you grow the party. That's how you get numbers, and that's how you win elections. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Diana, do you want to comment what you put in chat?
Oh, yeah, they voted for Biden because, well, my mom couldn't vote for Hillary because she was a woman. And my dad voted for Trump in 2016, but he couldn't vote for him this time because he didn't follow through with what he said. So, which we knew were all lies. So I wasn't surprised by their decision, but it was actually more disappointment overall that I felt rather than being surprised.
I think Stacy's got her hand raised.
Hey, Stacy.
Yeah, I wanted to echo a little bit about what Cindy said, and I'll sort of repeat something I said in my breakout room, which is that I live in an RV. It's a nice RV, but it's, I'm a high school teacher, and I have felt housing insecure for the last 5 to 7 years. And like, literally, I'm obsessed with my housing situation. It's like all I think about. And so, I make a lot of money compared to average working people. So my guess is that there's probably a lot of, working people who are like, they're just desperate. They're hanging on. It's the main thing they're thinking about is like, how are they going to put food on the table? And they're just not thinking about politics, right? And so, like, I think I agree with Spencer that it's important to like target people's emotions, but I think like the emotions, like where people are at is that they need politicians who recognize the desperation that most poor working and middle class people feel, and that they'll address that.
So how do we come at the question of that goes across both parties, and those on the conservative side thought Trump was bringing that to them? I don't know who that question is for. It's sort of, yeah.
I will say that like, I was I voted for Biden, but it was hard for me to get there. I mean, I thought about writing in Bernie Sanders, and part of like what really upset me was Biden campaigning on this, like, things will not fundamentally change under a Biden administration. Like, that comment was the thing that made me go, oh my God, but things desperately need to change. Anybody who's saying like the status quo is great, I feel like is just completely disconnected from the struggles of average people. And I think that like if Democrats were championing a bold agenda, like Medicare for all, $15 an hour minimum wage, you know, free public higher education, you know, even like programs that help people, like expansion of housing assistance, and, you know, a Green New Deal where people can have strong, reliable union jobs in the green economy. I mean, I feel like all those things would actually like inspire people like me who are really just focused. I mean, and I'm not apolitical. Let's be clear, I am not apolitical, but I think there are probably people like me who are so desperate that they are apolitical, that they're just too busy focusing on getting through the day.
Joy?
That is so well said. I think that the working person is so busy trying to survive and been so slighted by the political system and doesn't feel they have a say or a voice. And that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to the table, is leading by example in that way and helping people understand that they do have a voice, and this is how you use it, and this is where you can go. And so what needs to happen, I think, for the people who are well informed and politically minded, to be able to amplify the voice and the needs of the people who are really, really busy and overwhelmed, the needs of those people to the forefront, and doing so consistently, which will build trust within the party. And that's, it's going to take a while to rebuild trust when, you know, there's just been so many lies and just, so trust, I think, is the thing that needs to happen. The one word that came up in my small discussion group was compassion. We talked about, that kind of goes back to what Spencer was saying, is the compassion. And then also to be able to engage in these conversations with other people, with different mindsets or similar and varying mindsets, is to go in without defense. Because if you are defensive, you can't listen. But when those defenses go down, especially when it comes to, you know, racial equity, people tend to get really defensive. Or when you hear, you know, what was talked about earlier, defund the police, it just is met with defensiveness. But when that defensiveness is away, is gone, then people can really listen and hear what's behind that, what the need is. And for people such as yourselves, you're in a powerful position because you know how to navigate the political system. You know who to contact, or how to make contact, what to write, what to say. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so that's why I go back to meeting the people where they are and inviting them in by teaching them how to, and reminding them that they do have a voice, and this is how that they can use it, and consistently showing up for them in ways that help them know that you are advocating for them on their behalf, even if they don't have the mental or physical capacity to do it for themselves.
Okay. Mike, you had something?
Yeah, I liked, honestly, all the comments that all three folks made. And I think we have to try and figure out how those things get combined into a strategy for the Democratic Party. The idea that how we communicate those things is absolutely critical. And I thought Spencer was totally correct that the Democrats have done a horrible job of that. For me, the most important underlying reality in politics right now is the fact that since 1970, the real wages of the vast majority of Americans have fallen. In other words, the real wages, it's a simple economic concept. It's how much stuff, how many services and goods can you buy? And that's fallen. It fell like badly starting in 70. It had been going up since World War II, and people had expectations. Things were going to get better. Their kids were going to be better off than they were. That's not been the case practically since 1970. It fell dramatically further in 85 when Reagan was president. Took a huge dive in 08 at the beginning of the Great Recession. And so as a result, people have expect that government's not doing anything for them. And it doesn't matter whether Democrats or Republicans have been in office on that statistic. And it doesn't explain why people think Trump would help them out of that situation, but it certainly explains why they're not happy with someone like a Biden or Hillary or someone else, if they get the sense that they're not going to address that pretty fundamental issue. And it's not that they're all starving to death, although there are people who are in terrible situations, especially around housing, but it is a problem that people have just the sense that things are not getting better, they're getting worse, it's going to be worse for them and their kids. When you look at all the folks in tents in Santa Cruz, part of that issue has to do with the lack of affordable housing, but a big piece of it is people don't have income. There's a huge class of people, it's age-based to a great extent, of people who've entered the economy in this period we're talking about, and who were born in the 90s or whatever, and who basically don't have the income in this town to rent a studio, much less buy a house or something, which would have been the case, or the expectation or the hope before 1970. So the Democrats have to figure out how can they address this issue. And I don't think taking symbolic actions or being bold, and I'm a socialist feminist, but I don't think talking about the long range goal of socialism, although that needs to be done, is the way you're going to win voters over. I think the question is going to be, what can the Democrats actually deliver at the level of at the national level? And they can deliver on some stuff, but not on everything. It's such a tight, and that's a very practical question here about Democratic Party politics. What issues should they be picking, not to be bipartisan for the sake of that, but for the concept that that they're not just going to promise something or show what, stake out their position, which people will like, but actually deliver some stuff. And sometimes that's going to require a little bit watered down something, but at least it's going to deliver something very real to people, an actual job, a check in the mail. You can't underestimate how critical it was that Donald Trump signed a bunch of checks that went out to people, and that Biden's done it now. A massive difference. And I think that kind of thing will make a difference to people. And I'll end this by just saying the whole issue of infrastructure, the idea of actually creating jobs, and while you're doing that, design the program in a way that it's environmentally sound and all, and the policies of the Green New Deal, but it's not important that you name it. It's important that people get a job, or that people get access to a program, or their kids can actually get something they need out of the school system. And for me, that's a very narrow path for the Democrats to try and figure out, where they have such a narrow majority. And it may require that they get rid of the filibuster, because they're not, apparently the Republican approach is to oppose everything, and they're not going to be able to win and swing votes over. So whatever it takes on some practical level to actually deliver some goodies to people who have been left behind and feel like it's not going to change. And the Democrats are fundamentally not different than the Republicans on that essential issue. And I think the Democrats should stay away from things they know they're going to get their butts kicked on, even if it's a perfect policy program, but they haven't got the votes to do it. You're spinning your wheels. People are going to think it's one more failure, one more evidence that government doesn't work. So pick the things you have the votes to actually make happen through 2 houses and signed by the president, and make them be economic. Make them be about this notion that your life has fallen apart. That's what I think the Democrats should be focusing on.
Thanks, Mike. Cindy, your hand's been raised.
Sure. Totally agree with lots of what Mike just said. And I actually wanted to build a little bit on what Joy said about showing up and delivering the goods, which is also kind of building on what Mike said, right? And showing up from communities and disengaged communities that have been frequently systematically disenfranchised. There's systematic barriers in a lot of these underserved communities for economic prosperity. So they're actually even more disproportionately affected by these things that are affecting the larger communities out there. And so, showing up for these communities means not 6 months before an election. It means going out there and, again, not listening, not telling them what they need, but listening to what a community is asking for. And then it's the jobs of politicians to plug that into the system and deliver results, right? And if you deliver results to those communities, they're going to come off the sidelines for you and show up because their lives have been made better. And what we're not doing is that. And I also wanted to just jump onto this idea of being defensive. You know, I've just joined the DWC, but the level of defensiveness and the level of we're great and doing everything perfect is pretty crazy. Like, it caught me off guard. Like, nobody is perfect, but the Democratic Party, at least a lot of my interactions with it, has been that we're less bad than the other people, and that's enough, is not inspiring. And it's frankly just not true. I mean, we need to own up to the fact that we haven't served BIPOC communities. We haven't served Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. We have not made policies that have made their lives better. Their lives have been made worse by the things that Democrats have done. And frankly, for the workers, we have not made their lives better. We've stripped away union protections. We've done all of these things that have not been great. And we don't need to dwell on that, but we need to own that and figure out how to do better and deliver for people if we want to win, because we have to bring people off the sidelines, because otherwise we're going to lose.
Thank you. Let me throw a question towards Spencer. As I'm listening to this, I'm wondering even if we can get away from the concept that the Democrat label brings in people's minds. Is the label Democrat something that we can't move away from and people already have preconceived notions?
You're muted, Spencer.
I think we should be proud of that that name, and it's wonderful that it happens to be, you know, coincident with the name of what we are, a democracy. So I think it's a great name and we should be proud of it, but we should be better at talking about the values and emotions associated with that, and less, again, about the sort of facts and logic approach to this. Let me just point out in passing, by the way, that there is a very significant difference between the two parties. You know, Obama achieved Obamacare, which did not go as far as a lot of us wanted, or as far as he wanted to go. He agreed single-payer healthcare would be better, but it was a political, just a titanic political achievement that we've been struggling towards for something like 7 decades. And Biden has just passed some of the most progressive legislation since the New Deal, and he is working on the $15 an hour minimum wage as well, that, you know, for technical reasons got taken out of that bill, which politically may actually have done him a favor. I think it might increase the odds that it'll pass later. In larger terms, I would point once again to the communication gap. As I said, people already agree with us about the policies. We have strong majority support for things like affordable healthcare. I mean, I can't imagine anybody's against that idea. People want living wage jobs. They want a lot of the things that we're promising and have for a long time. The communication gap is pointed out, though, by the data. When you look at the identification, where only about 1/4 of Americans identify as liberal, even though strong majorities of Americans agree with us on issues. Gun safety is another one of those. Race relations, tolerance and inclusion is another one of those. You know, we're winning on policies. I was on a panel some years ago at an event that Javier Becerra was part of when he was the Attorney General, I think, at the time in California. Now he's our new Secretary of Health and Human Services. And he said, he quoted Jerry Maguire. He said, "Voters are telling us you had me at hello." They agree with us on the policy, but we lose on the persuasion. And that's all the non-rational stuff. And something I said in the breakout room is, it's so hard for us to even think about this, to even imagine what the world looks like to people who don't agree with us on the cultural stuff, on the communication issues, because we're actually trapped conceptually inside this Enlightenment framework. This is a lot about what my book is about. And we think that reality is defined by rationality, and we don't realize there is almost half the population for whom that's not true. They see that as a very constrained view of reality, and they will define reality according to faith, tradition, culture, other things. Some of the stuff that Diana mentioned, people who leave us on the issue of abortion, for example, and we argue with them about women's rights, and I agree with that argument, but they're coming back at us with the argument that it's a sin to kill a child, which is how they look at it. There's no there's no connection across that gap unless you are able to understand that it's a cultural communication that's much more emotional and values based than it is logical, and you'll never win that as a logical argument. But the thing is, you can still win elections by reaching people, even people who disagree with you, even if they disagree with you strongly about some things, if they feel like you understand them at this non-rational cultural level. And that's where I believe the data is pretty clear. It shows that's where we've been losing for decades now.
Thank you. Stacey, you just put a great comment in the chat. Did you want to read that or speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I hear Spencer saying that the problem is communication. And like, I do think that our communication has been poor, but I think it's been poor because we don't have a lot of good things to communicate, right? Like if you look, I grew up in Michigan, and like my first important boyfriend, his dad worked the third shift at a GM plant. They had a nice big house and a retirement fund. I mean, it used to be possible to be like a working person in a factory and live the American dream. And the very first protest I ever went to, I sort of went to unwittingly, but it was a protest of union workers against NAFTA. And I kind of thought like, gee, I was at the Capitol for something else, and I was like, wow, what is this? And I started really looking into it, and like NAFTA, CAFTA, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, like all of these things have completely undermined the economy of Michigan, and working people's lives have been pulled apart. That was done under Clinton, right? And so the problem isn't just that like we're not communicating well, it's that we have bad policies. And so then when we have to like communicate something, all we can say is like, oh, well, we're not as bad as the other guy.
Thank you. Spencer?
Yeah, just if I could quickly, yeah, I agree that we've hollowed out the middle and working class, and we've developed a really predatory economy that sucks wealth out of it and puts it up towards the very top. So I agree with that. Those are very serious issues. And that is the substance of why so many working and middle class people are so understandably angry. But why would those people vote for somebody like Donald Trump, who then stocks his administration with people handpicked by the Koch brothers and the Mercer family, literally, and engages in the same old billionaire and corporation friendly giveaways, essentially. I mean, he took it to a level of looting that has been hard to match. That's why working people would do that, and middle class people would do that, because they believed him for reasons we can challenge all day long in terms of the rational and fact-based reality. But they found him more convincing, and in fact were frightened by a lot of what they were hearing from Democrats. So again, I think because we're sort of stuck in this Enlightenment conceptual framework, and it's very hard to imagine what it's like outside of that framework. As I said in the breakout room, it's as if we're all fish and we're trying to imagine what it's like to be walking around on land. We're not even aware that might be possible or what that could possibly be like. It's very, very hard to avoid going back to the economics and the policy. And I'm not dismissing the importance of those things. They're critically important. But when it comes, what I'm talking about is winning elections. And we can't make progress if we don't win elections. It's long, assuming we want a democracy. I mean, if it's not a democracy and it's a dictatorship, then sure, just jump to what you think is the right answer in order that it must be so. But we have to win elections, which means persuading people. And the persuasion part is not done with policies. People, it's really hard to imagine how little the average voter absorbs on the policy level. This is why Trump does these 3- and 4-syllable phrases like crooked Hillary, right? Or the Republicans in general, radical socialists, right? Chinese communists, the China virus, that hateful phrase they've been using, because they understand actually the human mind can only store a few bytes of information at a time, and it stores the most emotionally charged ones. Now, again, this doesn't mean dumbing down our positions. It doesn't mean pandering to the other side and trying to be just sort of Republicans light. We can actually be very bold, as I believe Joe Biden is being very bold on the policy level. In fact, there are ways we could be bolder. I agree with that recommendation. It's just, how are you going to persuade people to vote for that? Socialism is a good example of this as well, and I realize I'm going on a bit, so let me wrap it up in a sentence.
Okay.
But socialism is, has a lot to argue for in a lot of people's minds, but the brand is the problem there.
So I see there's several hands up, and Peggy, I wanted to catch, did you have something before Nora and then Cindy? You want to go next? Okay.
Spencer, my question is for you. When we talk about communication and persuasion, I guess my question is, what's the problem with the learning curve? The Republicans figured out many, many elections ago how to use marketing and advertising strategies. What's the problem? There's a lot of smart people in the Democratic Party on all levels, and why haven't we? What's the challenge and obstacle to not being better at marketing and communication? And I don't mean that in the superficial way. I mean it in just what you're talking about of persuasion. Yeah, thanks.
Well, as I point out in Patriots of Two Nations, and I'll be saying more about this in my next book, since the Enlightenment, we've been raising generation after generation to think within this rationalist framework, which in many ways is wonderful. It's where we got democracy, and we freed ourselves from all kinds of bigotry and superstition and made tremendous technological and economic progress, etc. But it's also a kind of prison. And if you look at the history of education following the Enlightenment, especially since the 19th century, we've been training people to think in this rationalistic framework. And I'm not the only one to notice this. It turns out there's quite a history of this. And it's hard for us now as Enlightenment liberals to even think outside this framework. And I think we see this frequently in discussions such as this one, that people keep turning back to the rational analysis and coming again back to the voters with more facts and more logical arguments. And this is an indication, and it's really important to understand what it would be like to, for example, here's an example I use in the book. If you walk into a church where people are conducting a service and you say, you know, there's no scientific evidence that any of this is true, that's not going to get you anywhere. And in fact, it indicates you don't know what those people in that room are doing right now. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Mike, I had Nora next.
No, fine, of course.
Okay, all right, thanks. Nora, you're on mute.
Thank you. You know, if the Democratic Party, either nationally, statewide, or locally, comes down to a discussion of marketing and communications, then we have truly lost our way. Marketing and communications did not put Joe Biden in the White House. Marketing and communications did not put Raphael Warnock and Joe Ossoff into the Senate. Stacey Abrams put those two guys there, and she had a lot to say about Joe Biden getting to the White House. So as we debate policies versus our ability to articulate the fact that we don't really do much, and when we look at some of the political work that's being done now, you can kind of do a side-by-side comparison of the Democratic Party's policy work and Bernie Sanders' campaign platforms. So as long as the Democratic Party keeps marching left, we should be okay, because we'll be able to capture new voters with new concerns that we better be out in the community listening to. And I say that as a 1st District representative elected to the Democratic Central Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. I had Cindy up next.
Yeah. So again, it's hard. I always just find it really challenging when we do this debate about communications, and when the bottom line is we don't have anything to deliver that resonate with people. Like, it's not a communications problem. I totally agree with Stacey. It's like we don't have anything to say that resonates with the majority of people. And that is a problem. And the other thing is, I think it is an absolute mistake for Republicans to think that the people who voted for Trump, the working class people who voted for Trump, voted for him for economic reasons. They voted for him for essentially social reasons. One, there is a huge part of this country who is straight up racist. And the fact that we pretend that that's not true is ridiculous. So a lot of people voted for Trump because they're straight up racist and he's straight up racist. Secondly, the other reason they voted for him is because his brand was not a politician. It wasn't policy. It wasn't economic policy. It was that I'm not a politician, which resonates with the majority of people because politicians are not delivering anything to the majority of people that they feel inspired to step up for. And somebody saying like, I'm not part of their game, I'm going to bring you something else, just wait and see. The fact that that sounded better than, hey, we've been doing this for you and working for you for the last decades, the fact that we couldn't win that argument should speak really to the fact that it's not a communications problem. It's a results problem.
Thank you. Mike?
But, you know, Spencer and others have sort of raised this issue about why did people vote for Donald Trump? I made this point as well, you know, that he pretty clearly was not going to help them with their economic problems. And I don't think most people that voted for him thought that he was. I think what happens is most people, there are other issues that exist that are going to be very difficult to tackle. They're not, you can't do it in an election cycle. Authoritarianism, the basic idea that, you know, somebody else will fix it for me. When Donald Trump's most powerful comment was, you know, I can fix this. I'm the only one that can fix this. And it's bullshit on one level, but it, you know, highly technical term there, but he actually, what happens is, in the belief that the government's not going to do anything for you, that's not really what's happening in an election. People come up with other things that are, you know, people identify with the back to authoritarianism. Donald Trump, here's a guy who seems to like get his way and do what he wants to do and says what he wants to say. And boy, it's kind of an avatar for like, I wish I could say what I think about stuff. There's a bunch of craziness going on and I don't get to say what I think and nobody pays attention to me. And here's this guy that somehow they understand he's kind of, they see him as almost like kind of clownish or foolish, but he's interesting, it's different, it's entertaining, because you don't expect that when they go to the polls, they're affecting their bottom line, how much money they're going to be able to make, or can they afford a house, or will their kids be able to get the education they need, or something like that. So all these other issues that the Republicans glom onto, emotional kinds of issues, and it's not one issue that appeals to people. Racism is certainly appealing to a bunch of people, but not everybody that voted for Donald Trump. Other people get excited by the idea that here's a guy that challenges political correctness and the kind of stupidity that both parties on some level get into about, you know, fixing some little thing in a stupid way or taking up some issue that's of no real interest to anybody's bottom line. And so I do think that it matters what the policies are that Democrats do. But again, if you could show people that their vote actually mattered to them in a direct way, and that the people they're electing are going to make decisions that actually affect their bottom line, I think they would have a different view. And that's a communication question. And again, I think the Democrats generally have policies that would tend to deliver the best stuff to people, but they have not been successful at delivering them. They certainly, the comment made earlier, when they support stuff like NAFTA, that destroys the basis for the blue collar working class and so forth. There's a bunch of issues around those questions. But I think the issue is, how do you get people to believe that politics is something that matters to them in terms of their daily life, and not simply a show in which they get to vote for and it wasn't before Donald Trump. It's not about the personality of the candidates or how they dress or little, you know, tabloid issues about their private life or something. Politics should be about like, well, what's the government, what are the programs? What's the government's going to deliver to me? If I vote for this person, how will that change my paycheck, or how will that change my, you know, other issues in my community in some real way? And the Democrats have not been good at communicating anything about that, and they certainly have not been delivering on those kinds of things. And so the question is, given two houses of Congress and the president, what kinds of things could we deliver that in the short term, before the next midterm election, would actually show people that the midterm election matters to them in a real way? And I don't think it's around broad slogans like, you know, we believe in working people, or socialism, or whatever, even if you come up with a different name like Tom Hayden tried, you know, economic democracy or something. That concept's not going to resonate, I don't think, with most people. I love it, but they're not going to love it. And so the question is, how do you actually deliver a couple of programs where money shows up in a check in the mail, which they've done? Biden's done that. I think he's been doing some good stuff on that level, but how can we expand that? How can we deliver? You should not take on gun control. It's an issue that people care deeply about. It's an essential issue, but you haven't got the votes. You haven't got the votes in the Democratic Party right now to deliver shit. So you go and talk about gun control, but you're not going to change the gun control situation. You're going to debate it and then you're going to lose. Another example of government failing, talking about stuff and not delivering on it. What are the issues we can deliver on and deliver something tangible? And I would argue economic to people in a real way. And then they won't be living elections as fantasy lives for voting for the kind of most entertaining clown that's out there. And that was Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mike. Before I call on the next person, there's a lot of you who haven't raised your hand. Do I see your names? If you wanted to speak up, you can send a chat or show me your image and raise your hand now, so we get to have a chance to have you included.
We should point out we have about 15 minutes left, and so that it's time.
Okay,
to
we have about 15 minutes left.
Orly,
Spencer, did you raise your hand?
Oh, I did, and I thought this might be helpful for the discussion. I actually feel like several of us are converging on a similar point, which is that, in fact, I would say that Stacey Abrams, who was vital, can't be appreciated enough, was doing really effective marketing and communication, because she was reaching people where they were and communicating with them in a way that mattered instead of overlooking them and taking them for granted. And people voted for Trump, even though he was going to do the opposite of what he was promising, because he's a marketer. That's one of his few skills. He's a salesman. He uses a few rudimentary sales techniques over and over and over again. So there isn't necessarily a conflict here. The policies are crucial, but we lose elections when we don't communicate effectively.
Thank you. Joy, did you have something to add?
Yeah, it's just with Stacey Abrams, it's both, and she was able to educate through her marketing and through her communication why and how people mattered, and that their actions make a difference. So not just that their vote mattered, but that they mattered, and that they, especially in the South, Black people have just been not considered. The vote has been cast aside and suppressed in so many ways. I mean, the election was won because the Black people it was a courageous move, because there's still a fear to even go to vote, and that's a generational fear. And Stacey had to help dispel that fear and help people understand why it's important, but why they are important. And that, again, goes back to communicating to the heart of the person and really empowering them with knowledge to understand that it really does matter. It really does make a difference. And now that they got to see it in action, that is going to allow them to say, okay, I see it this time and I'm going to do it again. So how do we do that then on the local level, to be able to empower people with knowledge that they matter and that their actions will make a difference as well? And again, it goes back to education and getting down, and I shouldn't even say getting down, but getting to the perspective of that person, because we all here have some different level of privilege that we're operating from that does not allow us to see things from another perspective. And there's this expectation or maybe this understanding that, why do people do this when this? And a lot of it is because they're not educated about it. They don't know that, they don't know certain things, and the information is not accessible. So and that's another thing that Stacey did. She made the information accessible to the people so that it made sense. And again, she empowered them and helped them understand that the more people come together and share voice and share in action, it's going to make a difference. And so getting those people off the sidelines is going to be similar to that action, and helping people understand that they do have a say and that they do in fact matter, and that you are working on their behalf and working for their empowerment.
Thank you, Joy. I want just to add, Gail Pellerin has put something in the chat that says at least 250 voter suppression laws have been introduced in 43 states. Yet 704 bills to expand voter access has also been introduced. So there's that battle going on in the background. Cindy, you have posted a link that you have now posted twice. Would you tell us a little bit about that and also make your comment?
Sure. So just building off the story in Georgia. So I totally agree with everything that Joyce said about how people from those communities, those community connectors who were there, were able to connect with people where they are and get them off the sidelines. But I will guarantee those people will be right back on the sidelines if those politicians don't deliver for those communities. Because the promise that was made to those voters was that they were going to go and work for those communities' needs. And if they don't deliver, those people are going to go right back onto the sidelines and or, you know, vote those folks out, which is how it should work. You know, politicians work for the people and they need to deliver results. You know, I just found this in prepping for this today. I've been doing kind of a lot of reading. It's an older article, but I find it fascinating that there are Democratic billionaires in the world. I mean, that seems like an oxymoron in and of itself. But this article is written by one of those. It's pretty long, but I think it lays out systematically with data, including polling data and numbers, about how the Democrats really have failed, you know, and kind of jumped on the bandwagon of trickle-down economics, that it's all going to work out. If we keep governing for this 2%, that it'll work out for everybody else. And so I just really encourage people at their leisure to check that article out. I found it really, really compelling. It just brings a lot of threads together. A lot of the things that all of us have been talking about today, it brings a lot of it together. It has sources cited. And so I think it's a pretty powerful encapsulation of some of the things we were talking about today.
Thank you. So Mike, I was thinking of giving each of our speakers a minute, 1 minute, to make a wrap-up statement, and then Mike, have you make some comments if that's okay, unless we missed anybody else who wants to make a comment. No?
Let me just say, let me ask first, as you've asked, is there anybody that hasn't spoken up yet? That let's pause. It's hard for us to do this, but let's pause for about 10 seconds and see if somebody actually jumps up.
Is anybody going to count?
No, if not, we'll move on. But I just want to make sure people feel that they are welcome to speak here. Okay, well,
no pressure.
Again, please feel free to share stuff in the chat. And I say, like, let's give people up to 2 minutes to speak each.
2 minutes, okay. So we'll start in the same order. Spencer, do you have a wrap up, couple of minutes?
Sure, I think I would repeat that the debate that's going on between being safe, being bold, which is usually identified as being moderate versus being progressive, is an important debate to have at the policy level. It's vital. That's why we have primaries. That's why we have all the different civic organizations we have. Nothing to worry about. That should be happening. But the way we tend to have that debate is an indication of how trapped in our heads, in our rational mode of thinking that descended from the Enlightenment, the Democrats tend to be. Because we think that it will determine whether we win elections or not. And I would say that despite what we want the data to say, because of what we think should be true in the world for good reasons, the data says what it says. And when you look at the data, it doesn't make sense that Democrats who have a natural electoral majority because we represent the interests really of all Americans, because even rich people do better under Democratic presidents. That's true going back to, I think it's 1933, as far back as you measure, we're better on every economic measure for all of the different classes. And the other side, you know, they represent, especially lately, rich people. And that's a minority. And that's why they're playing so dirty, because they can't win on their policies, which only serve really a small minority of Americans. So on the policy level, we should never lose. And yet we do. And when you look at the data, you discover that we're losing voters, and have been really since the 60s, to a large extent because of race issues, for sure, and the other side's exploitation of race issues, but also all kinds of other cultural issues and non-rational issues. And if we, to the extent that we don't understand that, is the extent to which we'll continue to lose elections we should win. Now, the good news is this is not true of all Democrats. You know, we have seen Democrats who are good at both the head and everything that's below the head. And so we can win elections, and doesn't mean we have to be timid. In fact, I'd argue the opposite. And it doesn't mean we have to sacrifice any of our principles. I'd argue the opposite. But we do have to win elections if we want to make progress.
Thank you. Cindy, you have closing comments.
Sure, I'll try to be pretty brief here and just say that this debate within the party and discussion about head and heart it serves the other side. What we need to do is deliver results, and we don't need to have a policy debate. We need to deliver policies that serve the majority of Americans, and we are not doing that. And so saying that we stand for the majority of Americans is not reflected in the policies that we move forward. The majority of Americans are not being affected in a positive way. Housing insecurity continues to rise. Income inequality continues to rise. So take the last 40 years of what the Democrats have done, and they have not benefited the majority of people. So I don't think we need to have a policy debate about what is radical or what is not. A policy that affects positively the lives of the majority of your constituents, that's not radical. That's literally the definition of moderate, right? If the average person is going to benefit from a policy, that's a moderate policy. And so these things that have been pinned by the other side as radical, $15 minimum wage, increasing the power of unions, go down the list of the squad that people have said is radical, are not radical at all. They're moderate. And if Democrats want to win, they need to deliver results to the majority of the people. And those people, every survey out there says that they support those things. So tagging it liberal or left or radical, it serves the other side. Democrats need to deliver results to the majority of the people, and then they can win.
Laura Lee, you're muted.
I think you just said joy.
I said joy. Thank you, Cindy. Hey, Joy.
I just keep going back to the understanding of, a lot of it pertains to what Cindy was saying, I think, with my very democratic East Coast Irish grandparents, understanding that the Democratic Party was the People's Party. And I feel like growing up, there's been, gotten away from that in a really big way. And I don't know if it's just because there was this pull or this persuasion to be more like the Republicans to meet the needs of people who were voting. But I feel like the Democratic Party has really lost sight of being the People's Party. And while it says it in words, I'm not seeing it in action. And so really getting back to the foundation of who you want to be identified as as a party is going to be the way to go. And really starting from that local level and using the connections that you have on a state and then national level to show what it is you're doing here locally to create that template for change is kind of where I feel like the focus needs to be. And again, returning to being the people's party. That's what I would have to say. Thank you all so much for having me. I've learned a lot. I've loved listening to everybody. And
thank you, Joy.
More.
Okay, Mike, would you like to summarize a little bit about what we've just started the conversation, I think?
So let me have a little humility here. I don't think I can do a better job than the last three people did, summing up their earlier comments. I do want to recognize, first of all, that this was a really interesting conversation and civil, and not take that for granted. We live in a world where these kinds of things often devolve into horrible shouting matches and miscommunication so no ideas actually get shared with anybody. So I want to appreciate not only our panelists, but everybody else on the call. The other thing I want to just emphasize at the end here is that the Democratic Party is our party. And it's not a matter of us being sort of passive observers of what is going down here. We have an ability to, both at the local and I think the national level, to be engaged on these questions and to put our oar in the water, to use a metaphor here. And the fact that Santa Cruz has done that over time, that we've often been in a situation where people here have taken action, spoken up. I mean, our little transit district that I serve on the board of here, stuff has changed federal transit policy, providing additional funding for transit intensive communities. We get about $2 million a year. And we wrote a bill basically that got passed through Congress and through the administration's carrying out of that bill. That it was good for our community, but it turns out good for a lot of other communities. And it's very possible to weigh in on these matters and make a difference and not feel that we're out of it and all we have to do is sort of feel bad about the way things are going. So I think sharing all of these ideas that have been shared on this call with other friends and trying hard to make sure that those get into a wider audience is a really important idea. The main thing I want to do again is thank everybody for the quality comments and the nature of this. And we need to expand more of these conversations so more people feel confident enough to sort of share their ideas in the conversation. That's the one drawback I think from this was we tended to overly rely on our speakers and they had great things to say, but these conversations would be better because I know that everybody that's on this call talks to their friends about these issues. This is not something to go like, oh, I don't have any thoughts about that. No, people have, really strong feelings about this question of where the party should be going, what the president should be doing, what Congress should or shouldn't be doing, and so forth. And I think we just need to be more articulate about that and make more effort to get our ideas out there. So again, thanks to everybody for participation in this call.
Thank you. And
this is recorded and you can tell friends about this call if you like. If you go to the Democratic Women's website, just Google Democratic Women's Club Santa Cruz County. It'll take about 4 to 5 days to get this up, but there'll be a link to this that people can enjoy this conversation that we've had.
Thank you. And again, I echo what you said, thanking all our speakers and everybody's time today. And to let you know that the Democratic Women's Club is doing a series of these forums over the year. Our one in April is we're putting together is going to look at the state of the budgets in the city and the county. So we'll have more information about that we'll send out to you later. But a round of applause for our speakers and for all of you for joining us and your comments today.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you
for organizing such a great event. It was really, really well run. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Thanks, Spencer. I'm going to end, as the technical host, I'm going to end this call.
Happy Saturday.
Everybody stay
Bye, Julie.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you, Peg.
I'm going to stay on the line, I guess, as others leave, because somebody had wanted to talk to me. I forget who that was.
Yeah, I just want to say, since Karen and Daryl are on the line really fast, I didn't get to say, I realized right at the end of we got pulled back out that Daryl was one of the people standing right next to me, right behind me when I did my action in May. And so I'm I think about you from time to time, and was so honored to have you there, that you took the time. I'm emotional about it, that during COVID, you know, being so vulnerable, you came out. Like, that was huge. So I really thank you so much for that. And it just means so much. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
That you came out,
Oh,
that you brought us together. Likewise, said to our household when I said I need to go and be down at the town clock. They yielded, and so my daughter and I both came down together.
well, tell her I say thank you too. I just remember looking back, and I did not know who you were, and that was just such an overwhelming day in general. But to see that you came out, and it's one of the reasons why I did it the way that I did, because I wanted to stay really safe. And so I hope you felt safe in the way that it was put together, so that you felt like you could come during the middle of a pandemic, a vulnerable person. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I look forward to being with you on a number of future occasions as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks again,
Thank you,
Joy.
everybody.
I am going to end the call. Anybody else needs to talk to me can give me a call and we'll have a conversation. Great to see you, Karen, Daryl, really. Thanks. Bye-bye.